Hello, my name is Alan Young and I'm here at the 40th anniversary meeting of the British Association for Psychopharmacology in Cambridge, where I'm speaking to Professor David Nutt. So firstly, Professor Nutt, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me. And I wonder if you could briefly just outline your current role, position, interests, etc.
So currently I'm the Edmund J. Safra Professor of Neuropsychopharmacology at Imperial College London. I'm past president of the British Neuroscience Association and of the ECMP, and I'm currently president of the European Brain Council, which is an overarching organisation that tries to lobby for all the brain sciences and all the brain patient organisations in Europe. And
you're still a practicing clinical psychiatrist?
Yes, I am. I see patients. I have been seeing patients up till recently on a very regular basis. But in fact, as the NHS has been privatised, they decided that my specialist psychopharmacology clinic was too expensive, so they closed that down last month. So I'm actually not doing much clinical work anymore.
But your clinical work over the years has been in addictions, anxiety?
My clinical work has been largely in psychopharmacology, but I've particularly specialised in areas where there has been a relative deficit of other experts. So I've pioneered treatment services for anxiety disorders, for sleep disorders, trying to keep alive those areas where, which are unfashionable and where there are a few others. ADHD, yes, I set up probably the second adult ADHD clinic in Britain, in Bristol, about 20 years ago, and I've championed the cause of adult ADHD since then.
If I can take you back a bit, tell us how you got involved in the field in the first place.
Well, I knew I wanted to do research from the age of about 9. I wanted to be a scientist. And then when I was about 16, 17, I heard a guy called Gray Walter talk at my school, and he was one of the guys who actually invented EEG. And I persuaded him to show me and a few other of the science sixth formers around his laboratory, which was near Bristol. So we got really intrigued by his use of electricity to measure the brain and also to some extent stimulate the brain. And then I realized I wanted to be a brain researcher. And actually I went to university to do neuroscience, but then I realized that the kind of science I was interested in was what happens in people. And I thought it'd be better to be a doctor and make it easier to do it than being a psychologist or a neuroscientist. So I changed to medicine. And then I always wanted to do psychiatry, but then I got a bit bored with it, so I did neurology for a bit, realized how utterly tedious neurology was, so I came back to psychiatry and never looked back.
And you worked for a period in Washington?
Yes, I spent 2 years running the Alcohol Research Award at the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism. Very interesting experience for many reasons.
And tell us a bit more about that.
So it taught me a number of things. I mean, one of the reasons I went was because until you work in America, Americans never cite you. So I thought, well, if I go there, at least I can look them in the eye and say, why didn't you cite me? Great opportunity, fantastic facilities there, but enormously wasteful. I worked out that it would cost almost 10 times as much to study a patient in America than it did back in the UK, back in Oxford where I was before. So yes, it was kind of illuminating in a number of ways.
And of course that was before 9/11, and the costs skyrocketed after 9/11 because of the security.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, in those days, actually NIH in those days were a beautiful place because it was the parkland of Woodrow Wilson's country house, and you could just walk. I used to walk to work across the fields, through the parkland. Now it's like a military establishment. You've got everything's checked. You've got barbed wire everywhere. So the whole atmosphere has changed, unfortunately.
And you came back to Oxford and you worked in David Graham Smith's unit?
So no, I actually worked with David Graham Smith first. So halfway through my clinical training in psychiatry, I was desperate to do research. I mean, actually, I did research before I went to university. I was a lab technician for 6 months, extracting prostaglandins from umbilical cords, trying to see if they were the closure mechanism for the umbilical cord after birth. I always wanted to do research, and I started doing research as a medical student, working with Tom Barnes, going through notes, counting up doses of chlorpromazine and other antipsychotics, working out lifetime use of antipsychotics as chlorpromazine equivalents, so he could then plug it into his measures of tardive dyskinesia, etc. And I was always looking to do research, and I I badgered a number of groups, including Les Iverson's group in Cambridge, but the one that came up trumps was David Graham-Smith. So I went to be a clinical scientist research fellow there in the lab for 3 years, halfway through my training, which is something you could do in those days, because the Royal College just said, well, you're going to get a PhD. Well, that's not a bad thing for a psychiatrist to have, much harder these days. So I spent 3 years just doing lab-based research. Actually, and in fact, Phil Cowan joined us just a few months after, so we became a little bit of a team. And then a year or two after, Guy Goodwin joined. So you know, actually, his unit really spawned some tremendous people in the history of psychopharmacology in this country.
Yeah, and to some extent, it seems as though settings like that, which are interdisciplinary, seem to not be so commonly available.
No, and that's one of the things I've tried through my career to do. I've tried to make my unit a model of the old MRC unit in Oxford Graham-Smith's unit. I've always encouraged psychiatrists to come and do science, ideally to do some basic science as well as to clinical science. But I've always had basic scientists and clinical scientists together in the same group. I think it's crucial for translation.
No, absolutely. Now, you're a past president of the BAP. You're editor of our very successful journal, the Journal of Psychopharmacology, which seems to go from strength to strength. When did you first get involved with the BAP?
So I went to a BAP meeting, I think in probably about 1984. I think it was a Bristol meeting in 1984. And maybe I presented, I don't remember. Because at that time there were two competing organisations. There was an attempt to form a British branch of biological psychiatry.
Right.
And there was also the formation of the BAP.
Right.
And I found myself more attracted to pharmacology. I was studying drugs. You know, drugs have always interested me. I mean, I have a very simple view of the brain. It's a synapse, but a lot goes on in the synapse. You know, and so many drugs affect synaptic processes. So I was drawn towards the people that were studying drugs rather than the people that were studying other things. And that made quite an impact on me. So I started going regularly and making myself awkward, asking awkward questions. And eventually, when I came back from the States, I was invited then to take over the journal.
And how have you seen the BAP change over the time that you've been involved with it?
Well, the BAP has been great in the sense it hasn't changed a lot. It's grown, obviously. You know, in the old days, maybe 200 or 300 members. Now we have 800 or more members. But the principles have been the same, and that's why I still believe in it, and why I still love coming to the meetings. It's because basically it's democratic. Anyone can join as long as they're in the field.
Unlike some other societies.
Absolutely. Unlike some other societies, we're very elitist. I mean, you know, basically we get people of all stages in their career. We get people we get clinicians, we get basic scientists, we get people from industry. It's a very open organisation. There's a lot of interchange. It's great fun. The annual meeting is one of the highlights of the year, and it's discovered a winning routine from a very early time, and it's continued to provide that and also develop it to some extent.
Now, you're involved with science on a European level, in terms of your various positions. How do you see the future of our field panning out over the next few years? There's obviously great challenges, but
there's huge challenges. I mean, I worry for psychopharmacology as a discipline. I worry for pharmacology as a discipline. In my time, I have seen most pharmacology departments in the country disappear, dissolve into neuroscience departments or physiology or anatomy departments, brain science departments. I think people have been seduced into thinking there are easier answers in other fields like molecular biology or systems neuroscience. Or even other kind of fields of medicine, like inflammation, infection, etc. And I think people forget that the brain works through chemical messengers. If we don't understand those, we never understand the brain. So I'm worried, and I think hopefully the BAP will be one of those sort of bastions of common sense in terms of it will keep pharmacology of the brain alive.
However, in a positive sense, we see technology advancing in various different ways. Our ability to process data, the machines that we have are, to aid our research. I mean, for example, you're very involved in brain scanning of various different forms, particularly PET. And, you know, it wasn't so long ago that PET was almost science fiction, really.
No, and actually, it's interesting to see how the technology has developed, because of course, one of the problems with technology is that you do what it allows you to do.
Sure.
And actually, PET did offer a massive opportunity to look into the brain, count receptors, and potentially look at the release of neurotransmitters. That's one area where PET hasn't really fulfilled its potential, is it measuring endogenous neurotransmitter release. And the reasons for that are complex, but I think they're largely due to the fact that another technology came along, a leaner, meaner, cheaper technology called fMRI, which anyone could have, and which gave you equally beautiful images, but was much simpler to run. And I think people believed, and some of the protagonists of fMRI actually made the claim that, you know, fMRI will supplant PET in all branches of neuroscience. Well, of course, that's patently untrue, because fMRI can never measure the release of a neurotransmitter, whereas PET can. And so we've been deviated, I think, a little bit to the easy option of fMRI, and we've actually forgotten that we should be focusing, at least putting real efforts into measuring neurotransmitters. We can only measure dopamine at present. And so a lot of our theories about what's wrong in our patients are based on dopamine, because that's all we can measure. We should be able to measure serotonin, noradrenaline, acetylcholine. And those technologies are not impossible, but they do need investment.
Of course, yeah. Now, this is the 40th anniversary of the BAP. It's actually a very successful meeting. We've got lots of people, we've got people from all over the world. We've got young researchers. It strikes me that with all these young researchers coming here, you've just been at the postdoc symposium, I think, and seen various people present their research hot off the press, as it were. Does this bode well for the future?
It certainly bodes well for the future of the discipline, provided we can give them jobs, and provided we can keep a necessary focus on the pharmacological. There is a tendency for some people to be seduced into the broader neuroscience arena and forget that psychopharmacology is the core of how the brain works. So as long as we keep them on that track, then we will be successful. But of course, that's not easy, because one of the great problems is the fact that the industry is pulling out. And industry was a source of so much research opportunities, both in terms of PhDs, postdocs, and also in terms of providing new tools. And without tools to study the brain, it's going to be very difficult to keep on making the rate of progress we have up till now.
Professor David Nutt, thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan. It's been a pleasure.